Okay, the stops editor. So what is a TBEST stop? The stops panel, the view mode, stop attribute types, which include the stop amenities, time points, and special generators, and the stop calculator we'll cover in this lesson. So back to our route structure diagram, we're going to look at stops along alignments and segments, and we'll touch on some of these data points as well. So what is a TBEST stop? It's equivalent to a regularly scheduled on-street bus stop, bus bay, or rail stop. Each stop is unique to a route pattern. So basically at a location, you can have many stops that are on multiple patterns, and that's the way that TBEST kind of keeps track of things in terms of the data model. So there is multiple stops, like physical GIS stops that exist at one location that serve all the different route patterns that might access that same location. So just be aware of that when you're editing, is that you have stops on multiple patterns at a location. Each stop has unique socioeconomic attributes, special generators, amenities, headway, and time points if applied. Stops are the most basic unit of analysis in TBEST and can be used to summarize market coverage, land use coverage, accessibility, and mobility areas. So there's lots of tools that work off the stop locations and stop selections that can be used in TBEST. So for the stops panel, you can add and delete stops, move them, edit a lot of the attributes. You can also view the route pattern, headway, stop to stop in vehicle travel time and vehicle trips. You can also view and edit generated stop level socioeconomic characteristics. So that's something that's pretty cool that you can do in TBEST as well. I didn't mention edit park and ride, special generator, and park and ride spaces. So there's a way to edit spaces as well and enter them on a first stop basis. We kind of touched on the view mode at the bottom, but again, this is kind of important for what we do because this view mode switches quite a bit depending on what you're doing. But you can always control it at the bottom and switch to the mode that you want to be in based on your current workflow. So the view mode for the stops is at the bottom. It also shows you the visible stops. So, if you filtered stops for visibility, or you're showing route geometry only, it's showing 0 of 1207 are visible. Likewise, if you have a selection set, it shows that 8 of 1207 are visible. So it always shows you what's visible on the map based on whatever filter you might have, or the fact that you're in the route geometry only view mode. The stops editing toolbar allows you to select stops on the map, and it allows you to move, add, delete, and otherwise edit network stops. So you can create stops using several methods. One is to digitizing them using the add stop map tool, where you just click on the map and it adds a stop at that location. If you add stop on top of another stop, it will pick up the attributes of that stop, meaning the stop name, the description, that it's a time point, and that's and the special generators and amenities for that stop. So other methods are by adding segments. So we just added segments and it picked up those stops that are already existing in the network and added them to the segment. So that's another way of creating stops. You can copy patterns between routes, and that will also take the stops with it. Copy patterns in the reverse direction will create stops. The GTFS will create them. And there's a tool for generating stops at distance intervals along a pattern or segment that also is kind of an automatic way to just say, I want a particular stop spacing along my route. I don't really care where the stops are. I just want them to be at a particular spacing. So that's what that's for in the kind of rudimentary route planning level, that you want to have a certain intervals, then you can do that. So TBEST stop editing behavior. So this is kind of where we get into the network part of this, where if you digitize a stop, it's automatically placed sequentially along the route pattern. So it knows where it exists along the pattern as soon as you input it. For stops placed at overlapping route segments, TBEST will prompt the user for the insert distance along the route. So this is kind of one of those instances where in the transit world, if you're editing stops and you have a loop, right? So you have a loop and a route will circle back on itself and create the exact same alignment or geometry on the loop. So you have it, the same geometry twice. So if you try to add a stop to that location, it's going to say, well, there's actually two locations here. One is, inbound and one is at outbound, or one is at a certain distance and the other is at a certain distance. So it's up to you to choose which one you want. TBEST isn't going to know, hey, you just added a stop at a location, but that actual location corresponds to two measures along the route. It's going to ask you for the measures. So you need to know that. User digitized stops must be placed within 200 feet of a route segment. Yes, that is true. When you're heads up digitizing stops, they have to be 200 feet from a route segment. If you bring them in from the GTFS, it does not enforce that rule because we would, maybe have some problems there where stops are a little further than that. So it doesn't enforce that rule. Only when you're heads up digitizing does it enforce it. Stop-to-stop travel time is automatically calculated by TBEST based on the segment speed that's been entered and the network distance from the previous stop. So it automatically says what the speed will be or the travel time will be. For new segments that overlap existing stops, new stops for this segment will automatically be inherited or copied to the new segment. So that's good. All right, so we have stop definitions. We have the stop name, the description, whether or not it's a time point, and the ID that comes along with that time point. So that all comes in from the GTFS generally, but obviously you can edit that in TBEST. If you're adding a new stop, you can put in a stop name, a description, and time point. All that is available to edit right here in this grid, or you can use the calculator to do it. You can also edit the generator's amenity, which we've already done, and so you've seen that process. You can see their arrivals in vehicle time and headway for a particular stop that so you can see the service levels that are on it and in vehicle time from the previous stop. So it's a great way of kind of viewing the data from a service perspective at every stop to see what it's associated with. So for this particular route pattern, Route 1 westbound 10, that has 10 arrivals, probably in the AM peak, and a headway of 19. And because it's the first stop, there's no in-vehicle time. To the next stop, it's a minute and 5 seconds. So basically, that's what this is. Actually, it's not a minute and 5 seconds. It's 1.05 minutes. It's not a minute and 5 seconds. So sorry to be clear with that. Yeah, so that's what you have. These are not editable in TBEST, the arrivals, in vehicle time, and headway, meaning that these are derived numbers. You edit them elsewhere, and you can just view them here. You can make cell edits as well. So any cells that you want to edit, minus these yellow ones, can be edited. So what you see here is the socioeconomic data. So there is an option to view the socioeconomic data that's the model associates with the stops. And so what you can do with this is you can use the calculator to modify these numbers. So if you're saying, well, hey, I know there's more population around this stop than 5 people. Or it's in we're putting a new Amazon facility at this. It's not in the TAZ data. That's, TBEST doesn't have it. How do I override what the model is saying and put in a new number that I like or is more relevant for the application? And this is how you do that, is you just say, I want total employment or commercial and service employment to be, 50,000 people as opposed to 10,000. So you would just override it. So that you can do that for any stop, and all these values can be overridden for the SE data. And it's a great way to really fine tune particular stops and the markets around the stops that TBEST doesn't automatically pick up from the underlying data, that you can refine it at the stop level. And we used the calculator before, so I won't go into that, but using that to set special generators. And here's the list of special generators that we have and the amenities. So all of this is in the user guide as well. So if you need to know the definitions for these, you can certainly look those up. Okay, any questions on that section? We're going to add some stops.
Just to specify, the when you said the stop headways and vehicle travel times, you can't edit them. Don't you mean that that will be calculated within TBEST when you edit it in TBEST?
Yes, it's not directly editable in the stops panel. You would edit it at the route pattern level, and then it would show up here as a reference, basically. So you know at every stop how many arrivals are there, and the headway and the in-vehicle time. So it's a reference information, basically.
Thanks.
Okay, so let's go to our next exercise, 6.3 stops editor. And we're going to start adding a few stops to our route that we've created. So we're going to activate the Route 88 westbound pattern. So I'm going to switch over to my westbound. And when I do that, it zooms to it, and I can see everything on it. So at desired new stops manually along the western part of the route, and at each terminus, add stops. So let's do that. So the add stop button is this button on the stops panel toolbar. And so when I click this, I get this icon in the map window that lets me know that I'm in add stop mode. And so I can just start adding stops at locations along this route. So I'm going to add a few stops out here in the western part. A lot of development going on out here. So yes, there'd be a lot of need for transit. And so this area in particular is heavily congested. So transit would be a big bonus here. I live not far from here recently, so I experienced this quite a bit. All right, so let's pick up some stops. We're just adding stops kind of at intervals. And at the very end of the pattern, we want to add a stop as well. So that gets added, and I think that's a pretty good coverage for this route. So I think we're in good shape here for the eastbound or for the westbound. Now we want to do the same for the eastbound and add a stop at the very beginning and continue to add stops along their line. And I'm just doing this randomly. If you're doing this in the real world, you would probably take a little more time and just make some decisions about where these would be. But for our purposes, that's more of a different set of workflows here. So everything else from this intersection down looks okay. I'm going to add a stop at the very end. You can see it didn't pick up a stop at the end, and that's okay. It doesn't normally do that because it doesn't quite know where to put it at the end. It's kind of up to you to add it. One thing I would say in this regard is it's handy to, when you're adding stops, to see if there's any other stops that might be on at this location. And you do that, you see, I do the view all stops, so I can see, yes, there are stops that are located here. So I'm going to zoom in on that location. And I can see that probably this stop is the one that I want to pick up because it's on the right side of the road and I'm headed in this direction. So I'm going to add, go back to my add stop. I'm going to click right on top of that stop. And it's going to add it and pick up that it's 966 Weimer Hall and it has a university special generator. So by clicking on top of it, it picked up the information that was already there for that existing stop and it added it to the one that I added. So that's a great way to copy that information into your new stop.
Rodney, Daniel has a question. Do the added stops automatically snap to the route alignment?
They don't snap. They go to their existing location or wherever you add them. But they do know where they're at, right? So like if I add a stop here right before this Weimer Hall stop, it will put it in right before it. So we have our Ben Griffin stop right here, our stop that we just added, and then Weimer Hall. So it knows the location. So in terms of snapping, I don't know that it's snapping, but it's more kind of, it knows the measure along this route to where that location is, and it assigns that measure to that stop internally. So if that makes sense to you in terms of, how TBEST relates the stop to the segment, that's how it does, is via a measure.
Yeah, and like Rodney said, there is a like a maximum distance that the stops can be from the alignment. So in that respect, it also snaps to it by forcing you to only place it within what's the distance?
200 feet.
200 feet within the alignment. But Daniel, I think if you're wondering about manual placement of stops, you can place it anywhere along the route and it'll automatically reorder it and associate it with the route.
Yes.
He says, I did notice that I put a stop and it turned out to be on the wrong side of the road.
Oh, you can just move it. So, I mean, or you can delete it and redigitize it. But so there's a move stop button here. So whatever stop, it just does one at a time. So you can just click that, and then whatever stop you have selected, you can kind of click and hold and drag on it, and then move it wherever you want to move it to. So if I move this stop up to here, it will then place it right here. Likewise, if I click and hold and drag it and I take it up above and move it to here, then it will know that that it's a new shape, right? And it's a new location for that particular stop.
Great.
Okay.
I'm not sure if we're going to also get into it, into this advanced editing feature, Rodney, but when you add all the stops in one direction and say you have like a bi-directional route, you can copy the patterns over to the other side of the road for the other direction. So I'm not sure if we'll get into that eventually, maybe if we have time on day 2
Yeah.
talk about it. But there's more advanced editing features in TBEST that will save you time. Daniel, if you're tired of digitizing stop by stop, or like for example, if you want to add stops automatically with for a certain between a certain distance on a segment, that's also a tool within TBEST.
Right. Yes, and there's lots of copy functions for segments and patterns that might help you too, so that you don't have to redigitize things on a new route. You can either copy the route, copy a pattern, copy a segment, and that will help you as well. Okay, so yeah, so I think the other step here is to add a special generator of elementary school or public school to our Lutton-Child stop. So let's pan over to it. Sorry, doing a lot of panning. So because I have all stops viewable, I can use my select stops on the map tool button and drag a box around the stops that I'm interested in, which are the 2 terminus stops, inbound and outbound. for westbound and eastbound for the Route 88. So what that does is it selects, and I'll switch this to view selected stops only. So these are our two stops that we have selected. One is, I'll expand this so that it's eastbound and westbound stops. And what we want to do is calculate them both to a public school special generator. So I will find my public school here and just hit update, and it adds them as public school location. All right. So I want to zoom all the way back out on this. So if I double click on my eastbound, then it shows me the entire pattern. So I can inspect it. I have a stop at the beginning, I have a stop at the end. Now the list of stops is filtered to just those that are visible. So I can see that it ends at Weimer Hall and goes to Ben Griffin. And the Weimer Hall is a university special generator already, so that's good. So we don't need to change that one to be a university special generator. Now, if we do the same and activate our westbound pattern, our first stop is again Weimer Hall, and it is a university. So it already picked up that information when it digitized the, it automatically picked up the stops on the digitizing. So we're good. We have those two coded. So that was step 2 of our stops editor exercise. Okay, so let's hit save here. Going pretty good. Any questions? I mean, there are a lot of tools about route editing, including splitting, merging. So if this, we wanted, let's say, to add a time point to this so that we could do a, additional work here. So there's a couple ways to do that. You can split using the split tool. So this split active pattern segment. So if I wanted to make a split at this intersection, actually, let's take it right here. I want a place where it comes in and out. Let's do it right here. Split it right here. And then we're going to split it again right here. Okay. So now what we have are 3 segments. We have a segment that begins and ends right here, and one that begins and ends right there, and one that comes right here. So if we want to, let's say, realign this route, and we want to realign it in this area, this is why we split it here, we can delete that interim segment. Okay, that's gone. So now we can use our shortest path tool, or we can use the other tool, the route digitizing tool, to start at this endpoint. So our segment endpoint is right there, and maybe we want to come into this particular area, set a waypoint right here, and we'll come out here, and then we want to come out back onto the main road and double click. And now all of a sudden we have a new segment where we have rerouted our route to go into this neighborhood and back out onto the main road. So that's a basic way to perform a realignment, is to do that split and kind of push data out and then put a new segment in that is your realignment. And once you've done that, if you wanted to, you can then merge the segments because maybe you don't want that split anymore. You want to merge these 2 segments you have selected. You can click this merge patterns, merge pattern segments, and now it's a single segment instead of multiples. And likewise, you can, if you wanted to add stops, you can certainly do that, add stops in this location, and we'll pick up that, hey, this starts right here, the next one is here, the next one's here, and then back onto the main route. All right, so let's save that. That was just kind of a demonstration, not really in the notes, but something I thought might be of value to you, and how you can use these tools to create your routes, your route alignments and stops. Okay, so let's move on to the